Hi everybody. In this video, we want to take a look at using D5 in the creation of concept art. This could be concept art for video games or film production. We're going to use Sketchup, then head over to Substance Painter, then head over to D5, and finally we'll bring our finished render into Photoshop. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, everybody. So here we are in SketchUp, and this is going to be the centerpiece of our concept art, going for sort of a monolith style, maybe alien or sort of eldritch horror style, sort of H.P. Lovecraft nature. And we want to put this on effectively an alien planet. So how do we start this? Well, easy way to build your sort of obelisk or just sort of the stone column shape. We're going to go File, New, and here we go. And you can see we've got our scale reference here. And pretty simple way to do this is just spin the camera. I'm going to start with drawing a rectangle shape. Now we're going to scale this up, so just be mindful. We don't have to worry too much about this. And I think that will work just fine. I'm going to find the centerpiece. And we're going for something that's kind of a split column. In other words, there's going to be two parts of our obelisk. And this looks suitable enough. Once we do this, what we need to do is just figure out the overall shape. And I know that the design we're going for here is going to have kind of two uneven sections, and it should have a nice little taper. So we're going to draw lines on the surface, and the lines on the surface are going to basically just sort of act as a guide for the overall flow of our obelisk design. Now you could do this with kind of any kind of pattern or shape. I think that looks pretty good. If you want, you can go ahead and start maybe color coding this just so it's a little bit easier to work with. So we can put gray here and gray here, and that will give us our overall shape. Once that's done, go in and add a little bit more of a design, maybe make it look a little bit more kind of almost like this was at one point maybe made of one enormous piece of stone or whatever sort of concepty material you want to work with. And we're just going to add a few kind of edges to it just to make it look a little bit more serrated and maybe a little bit more kind of ominous or something like that. Again, just go ahead and apply your color. And you can also go in here maybe and add in intentionally a few cracks. Keep these kind of minimum, just kind of a few places where maybe the stone has been eroded. All right. Now, once you do that, next step will be to actually erase all the extraneous edges that we don't need. And we're going to keep this design pretty basic for now. All right, looks good. Continue erasing all of these stray edges and continue just kind of working this over. All right, looks good. I'm going to select these parts in here, just delete anything we don't need, and hit E on the keyboard again, just erase these parts out. All right, looks pretty good. We can clean up the inside as well. Once we're pretty happy with that, we'll be able to really kind of go ahead and group this maybe and just scale it upwards. All right, looks pretty nice. And drag out a selection, right click, make it a group, double click to go into the group. And again, I'm going to do Control A, hit B on the keyboard and apply the same color everywhere. And what we can do then is double click again, and I'm going to use the alternative push pull. So keeping the original edges, you don't want to use the standard one for this because it might actually kind of cause some issues. So do the alternative, hit Control on your keyboard, drag this out. There we go. And there's just sort of the basic shape. Now what we can do is select this guy, hit S on the keyboard, and we're going to scale this up. Now we don't have to work on an enormous scale. Once we drop this guy into D5, we can scale it a little bit larger. And I just want to make sure that this is kind of narrow. All right. And just take it up. We're actually going to kind of distort that a little bit. All right, I'm going to just explode this as well one more time. And again, just kind of, oh, there we go. That's what we're looking for. Just kind of taper it a little bit. Just bring it in. Doesn't have to be perfect yet. And then hit S on the keyboard. And we're going to drag this guy up. And you could continue working this, but I think that'll work for our purposes just for now. All right, let's move on. All right, everybody. Now that we've got our overall design, we're going to actually export this. And we'll go File, Export. And we're going to do 3D Graphic. And we want to make sure this is set to FBX, and you can see that's what this is, and just save it somewhere. Now, the next step is to assign UVs. Now, there are, I know of about 2 different extensions that can do this in SketchUp, but for our purposes, we're going to load this up in Blender. All right, so this is the model that I did as practice for this, and I'm going to use this one going forward. Now that you know how to make your basic SketchUp obelisk or sort of monolith shape, this is the one that we're going to use. So you can see it's a bit more jaggedy than the reference one, and at least a little bit more kind of narrow and a little bit more tapered. But honestly, you can, because it's really just concept work, you can kind of whatever sort of shape you're going for, easy enough to build. Now, in Blender, what we are going to do is actually do a UV unwrap for this. And so I'm going to click on just the UV editing tab. And how we did this and why we do this is kind of important. So I'll start with the why. When we go to Substance Painter, you can auto UV this and it will look okay. It's definitely not production ready UVs. And one of the issues with auto unwrap is it'll do its best to fit the shapes into a single UV square or UV tile. Now the problem is our obelisk or monolith has got some really long, thin pieces, and so the auto unwrap in Substance Painter is going to angle some of these to best fit into the UV island, or sorry, into the UV square or 0 to 1 UV space. Now that's not ideal for our purposes because when we apply materials, I don't want some of the materials to be straight and other ones to be at an angle, and there seems to be no way to fix that. So let's just do a quick manual UV unwrap. And this is, for an object like this, it's really basic. You could, if you wanted, drag out a selection and just go to UV and go unwrap. But honestly, it's really easy to just select a face, go UV, and just do unwrap manually. And so what we end up with is basically these these are going to be the vertical pieces, front and back. And then I did have to do a bit of a manual selection on really these actual faces here, just holding down multiples and just make sure that these are all unwrapped. Again, just go UV and unwrap. You'll end up with a lot of stray pieces like this, but all in all, it's a really basic just UV unwrap job. I don't necessarily recommend just using the UV sort of the auto UV for this. You can end up with some really weird results on this. So just do a quick basic hand-on UV unwrap. And you can see as well, what's really important for this in terms of texture painting is that all of the UV islands do point in the right direction, particularly for the vertical ones. Not so much important for these little ones on the sides. You know, our final shot is going to be something like looking from this angle, but as long as these are all kind of like just basic unwraps, they should be fine. Substance Painter will do a good job with that. All right, so once you've got your obelisk UV unwrapped, we just export it as an FBX again. And with that done, we can bounce over to Substance Painter. Now, you can also try in Sketchup. There are ways you can try doing this. There is a Sketch UV extension, but I had kind of mixed results with this. I'll show you what I mean. Now, there's also a paid UV unwrapper for Sketchup, but I think it's about $60 or $70. And honestly, Blender is free. So yeah. Anyway, back to the Sketch UV mapping tools. You can just go up here and I'm gonna drag this little guy out. Sketch UV, it's available in the extension warehouse for free. And I can just click on this, right click on a face and do planar map view, and you can kind of see what it'll try and do. Now you can also double click on it to go into basically orthographic mode. Again, right click, planar map, UV. You are getting some distortion. It's not the best, and part of that is just, it's an unusual shape, but this was the best I could get with this. So I would recommend just, let's do this manually over in Blender. It took about 4 minutes maybe to do it in Blender, and I'm not a Blender expert by any stretch of the imagination, so if you're familiar with Blender, you might do it a lot faster than that. All right, let's bounce over to Substance Painter. Please note as well that when you're importing this, you want to uncheck the box that says auto UV unwrap. We already have assigned UVs. They would have been saved and exported when you export out of Blender in FBX format. Okay, so all in all, there's our pillar. All right, now I'm going to move my assets library, just kind of get this back to sort of where it is by default. Just push that over there. All right, so here's our pillar. This is, again, the slightly edited one that I did to start with. And we can see if we go to the options for 2D only, there is our UV map. And everything should be pretty much assigned perfectly. And for example, if we go back to 3D only, and we were to just really quickly, just make a quick paint layer test. There we go. And I'm just going to change the color here, the properties of the paint. I'm going to move myself out of the way. And we just, for example, we're just looking to change the color of this, just as a quick test. How does that work? Yep, I'm able to paint all the way around the image, and I'm not really seeing a huge amount of really kind of messed up pixels. So all in all, the UV unwrap kind of worked fine, functional, if not professional. All right, now what we're going to do is just delete this little guy, and we're going to start. Now the idea with the obelisk is that maybe it's made out of some sort of marble style, maybe this alien type material, like something exotic like obsidian, but it's been there a long time and it's got wear and tear, but also that it has a sort of ominous glow and some ominous writing on it. So let's go ahead and just start building up our materials in Substance Painter. All right, let's go. To get started with this, I have gone to, I think, the Substance community and downloaded one or two different assets that will help us. So what we have firstly is this layered cliff rock, and then also a simple finish wood. Now, to begin, let's go ahead and just drag this layered cliff rock. This is going to be effectively our base layer. You can see when I do that, we've got some options over here, basically the properties, if you will, of this material. And you can see if we zoom in, already looks really, really nice. This is a fill layer, not a paint layer, and it is a substance material, so keep that in mind. And again, you can get these from just the Substance community assets or the Adobe, so there's kind of basically two sources for additional content. All right, this guy looks really nice, not quite as alien looking as we want it to be just yet. And so the first thing we want to do is adjust the color. Now we're going for kind of this much darker stone. Again, I'll move myself out of the way. And so this is going to be the primary color here of the actual rock. And I think that looks pretty good. The second is going to be color 2. And I'm going to, again, just darken this just a little bit. All right, this is looking kind of nice. Let's place that there. And then color number 3, let's see, can we add just a little bit of blue into this? Not overly strong blue, I just want a little dash of it. And I think that's going to look nice. Now, let's also just color 1 again. Try and bring back a little bit of blue into that guy too. All right. Now, overall, pretty happy with the look of this so far. Starting to look a little bit more kind of alien. That looks nice. Okay. Now, another thing I want to do is effectively, let's add our glossy finish to this. Now, the idea here being that you've got this old kind of alien-esque stone or foreign or sort of exotic stone, and it's got by default, this normally shiny finish to it, and then we'll add dust and a little bit of wear and tear on top of that. So just going back to my layers tab here, this is our default. Now, I'm going to add a simple finish, this simple wood material. I'm going to drag this right over on top. Now, you can see this is going to override the previous fill, which is not necessarily what we want. And so let's just look at the properties for this. So first thing I might change here is the projection, and try putting it on triplanar, and I think that looks good. And we can adjust the tiling. But I'm going to turn off the color, and turn off the height, and turn off the normal. In other words, all we want is that shiny finish. Now, if I hold down the right key and spin the camera, you can kind of see the effect that we're getting there. It looks like it's got this almost exotic sort of shimmer or shine to this alien material. And I think that looks really, really nice. Now, I do think that our overall obsidian kind of layer, I think I do want to maybe add a little bit more to that. So I may go back to the original materials here. And let's just look at this again. I think I just kind of want to darken this a little bit more. Let's see what we can do. And on color 3, maybe. Can we bring that down? All right, there we go. I think that's looking pretty happy with that overall. We're losing a little bit of the blue, so let's try and bring that back. And there's no sort of magic figure for this or magic number. I'm just throwing stuff up against the wall to see what sticks. Okay. Again, hold down the right mouse key and just spin the camera. The overall lighting for this, I think I'm pretty happy with. We can also go up here to the display settings and change the environment settings so we can actually see this in different lighting environments. All right, very, very cool. All right, let's move on and put some Eldritch style text on this. All right, everybody, moving on, we want to add our Eldritch text. So you can see one of the assets I have here is this necro text, sort of a necromonic in reference there. And you can actually get this from, I believe, It's the Adobe Substance 3D Community Assets, and you can see it right here. It's this really cool, very alien font. And so what we want to do is go back to Painter, and I'm going to double click on this just to select it. And I'm going to spin my camera here a little bit, and I'll move myself out of the way. And there's a couple of things we need to be mindful of. The first is the actual angle, because I want to make sure that my text is going down. And I also need to make sure that the color is set to, we're going to use sort of a very via render style kind of blue here. And if I left click and stamp, you can see nothing is happening right now. A couple of reasons why. I'm going to put this on its own paint layer. So just add its own new paint layer. And again, if I stamp, there we go. Okay, that looks okay, but it needs to be adjusted. And so a couple of things we need to do. I'm going to make sure that color is turned on, height, roughness. I'm going to turn off metal. We don't need that. And normal. So what we need to do is I want to adjust my brush a little bit more. And so I'm going to make sure that this is set to basically perfectly 90 degrees. Adjusting the size of my brush here. Do scroll the middle mouse button in and hold down Control. And I'm just trying to find a sweet spot here where I think the writing will be kind of legible. And then I'm going to change the actual text. So you can see right now it's set to parameters sample. So we're going to do something like, we'll put in, let's type in danger here. I turn off caps lock and just again left click, see how that looks. Okay. All right, looking pretty nice. I'm going to Control Z that. There's a couple of things I do want to actually adjust. I want to make sure that this looks like it's carving into the surface. So again, just left click. Okay, that looks nice. And right now I'm working with a texture map. You can see on the top right of 2048. I'm going to increase this temporarily to 4096 just so we can see what the actual detail is going to look like. And you can see that Substance Painter will sort of automatically sort of rerun through the entire process. All right, that's looking nice. Let's change my view to orthographic. So we're looking sort of, effectively we should be looking straight on. There we go. I want to get rid of any perspective distortion. And Control Z, I just want to step back again. I'm going to keep this on 4096. So we're carving into it, the roughness. Let's go ahead and maybe make this smoother. And for the normal, I think I'm pretty happy where things are with that. So that's okay. And let's just pull the camera back, see how this is looking. And I want to position this right here, a little bit higher. There we go. And there we go. We've carved into the surface, and I think that looks good. Now, let's change the text and do something else. Just a note there, I did have to completely just Control Z that and just make sure that the emissive was turned on before I started stamping onto the surface. All right, before we go any further, I'm just going to bake some textures as well. Now, please note, we do not have a high poly model. Normally, what you do is you'd import the low and you'd bake using the high as the reference model. We don't have that, but since we're going to be using masks and generators and things like that, I'm just going to go to the Bake tab. I'm going to make sure I've got all of these turned on, thickness, height, opacity. Now, we can also kind of just see kind of what we have here. The results are going to be slightly meh, but, you know, that's fine. I'll put these all down to 2048 just while we bake. And I'll leave everything as is and just do bake selected textures. And I gotta admit, as somebody who remembers baking in 3D Studio Max with cages, this is just very, very cool. Okay, once we've got everything baked, we're good. Let's just return to the painting mode. Now, whether really Painter will actually use a lot of these, sort of not that big a deal, honestly. It's just good habit to have something that the generators can work from. As a reminder then, we've got all of our text layer here, and we've got the original folder. So I'm going to leave the text on the top of the stack. One of the other assets I did download is also a dirt road. I've got different dirt materials here. So I'm going to just grab up this dirt road because it does have a little bit of a specularity to it. We're going to use that as effectively the dirt on our model. Okay, there we go. You can kind of see we've got dirt going on. It's just flat dirt. Now, it's a little bit too much right now. Obviously, it's kind of overriding everything else. So let's go to our generators here and actually create. I'm going to go back out of my assets, all libraries, and we're going to click on generators. Generator seems like I don't really understand the difference between a mask and a generator per se. I'm sure there is, strictly speaking, one, but it's just the terminology that Substance uses for them. Okay, so now we're going to look for something suitable. Now, one thing that's interesting is I want there to be more dirt around the bottom because that's where wear and tear is going to build up and where things just, soil is going to get in the nooks and crannies, things like that. So let's drag this moss from top over here. I'm going to drag it into the mask slot and left click and pop that in. Now, you'll notice, though, this is problematic. It is actually working the wrong way. In fact, it's showing us more of the dirt up here than at the bottom. So we can right click and we can just invert the actual mask here. Now you can see, okay, that looks good. Mask is still probably a little bit too clean for our purposes. And so we kind of want to make sure that, when we go in here, we really kind of clean this up a little bit. So in order to add our paint layer, just make sure that you're actually on the mask or generator here. And then what I'm going to do is just right click and go. We're going to just add a paint. There we go. And paint. Ooh, that took way too long. Sorry. All right. Now that we have that, we can actually go in and paint on this. Make sure I'm on my paintbrush. And let's just, find this dirt spot moss brush. Looks nice. I'll click on this so I can actually see the mask. And now you can see we can paint mask in or hit X on the keyboard and actually paint that out. Now, I'd prefer to just see the whole thing as I work, so just make sure we're here. There we go. And I'm going to make sure I'm on that paint layer. All right, I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. And I'm just, again, going to work it down here. We want, we kind of want mud and dirt and stuff in the nooks and crannies. I don't necessarily want it to override the overall look of the asset itself. Once you get the obelisk to or monolith to where you're pretty happy with it, and I'm just going to move on really quickly here, you can keep working and adding just layers of everything on this, but let's go ahead and bounce over to D5. To do that, you will want to go File and Export the Textures. And really, we're just going to go for the basic textures here. We don't need anything else. And we're going to leave the edges that you can see here as they are. We can always smooth those in D5 if we want to smooth off the edges. But all in all, pretty happy with this. Just make sure that when you export, you do also export all of the maps as well. Now, you can also load up, either export the model here from 3D Painter or export the one from Blender, because technically speaking, you haven't made any structural or geometry changes. All right, with that being said, we're kind of done with the Substance Painter part. Let's go ahead and bounce into D5. All right, everybody, here we are in D5. We're using the most up-to-date version, which is, I think, 2.6.4. Pretty stable. Actually, really enjoying this one. So first thing I want to do is I'm just going to turn off the clouds here really quickly. And in order to build our landscape, it can be a little bit hard to because D5 doesn't have a ground plane, it's a little bit hard to figure out where to start placing things. So one thing that might help is just hit M on the keyboard or go to the Assets library. And I'm going to go to Model, and I'm just going to pick George walking. And I'm just going to place him here. Now, this is effectively, I'm going to turn off his cycle because that's kind of distracting. Turn that off there in the animation. All right, here's George. George will act as basically a scale reference for us because we really want this obelisk to be really, really large. And he's also useful because he tells us where the sort of pseudo ground is within D5. Because again, we don't have a ground plane. Now, I'm going to change my navigation mode to fly, and I'm going to crank this up. We're going to work on a very large scale here for this. So apologies if the camera kind of bounces around a little bit. All right, next thing we actually want to do is forget about the obelisk for a minute and go to the, basically, the Quixel Bridge. Owned by Epic. Now, if you're a Twinmotion user, you should have access to this, and you can also set up a free account. I'm not going to run through how to do all this. You probably are familiar with this at the moment. But we want some objects that can be useful as our ground and should look kind of alien-esque. And we also want some stuff for the mountains in the background. One way to narrow this down, we can just go to Collections, Environment, and we can actually just go all sizes and put it to the largest size. And you can see now this will narrow down to really the largest 3D objects. I've downloaded a whole bunch of these, and I'm moving myself out of the way again. I have downloaded them in 4K resolution, and just download the default texture maps that come with them. We don't really need displacement mapping for these. They're going to be quite far away, and even the landscape that's close to the camera is going to be out of focus. So just download and export. I went for about 4 or 5 different ones of these. Okay, here we are back in D5. Hit M on the keyboard, go to local, and let's go to models. And you can see a lot of my models here. And this is kind of what it kind of looks like. They're going to just come in something like this. Bring them in, bring the model in. There we go. And you can then assign the actual textures. So use the eyedropper here. You can see base color map will be the albedo that you get from the Quixel assets. Normal, I believe the normal should be taken to the right. And I think, I'm not sure if memory serves, I think you do not invert these, but you'll have to do kind of a visual check on these just to make sure. One way that can help with that is to just add a point light and then just kind of make this super strong. And you can just kind of move this around and just kind of see how the normal map is actually reacting. And if it looks right, if it's pointed the right way, you'll probably be able to do a visual assessment pretty quickly. All right, now, a couple of other things. I downloaded some of these gigantic terrains, and this in particular, you can use any of these that are really, really large, but we went for the gigantic tundra terrain. All right, let's bounce over to a semi-completed scene, and I'll show you how to build this. Okay, everybody, so here we are with a finished scene set up in D5, and I'll just run through some of the assets here. So you can see these are the gigantic ground planes that we grabbed from Quixel, and they look really, really great. Resolution-wise, it is a 4K texture map, and it definitely, you get a little bit close in here, and you do get some kind of funniness going on. It's not ideal, but you can kind of see up close. Yeah, it's a little bit sketch, but that's okay. Now we've also added in some of these large tundra planes. So for example, you can just see these guys. Let's turn off this virtual reality thing. Don't need that. You can kind of see here, we've also brought in some more of these assets, just kind of throwing them down. The main thing is two things. Hiding the horizon line is absolutely pivotal. And the second thing is just making sure the scale of everything feels really epic and vast and kind of Starfield-esque maybe. I've also brought in one of the other Nordic rocks here. And you can see that I've kind of scaled it up massively. And this thing looks very H.R. Geiger-esque, very alien. Sort of, again, just going for that alien kind of strange landscape. If we put the geo and sky back, you can kind of see how it's just an Icelandic rock. Just kind of looks very, very cool. Now, one other thing to note is the background. As it currently stands, to the best of my knowledge, D5 does not have circular environments. It does have a couple of them. If we go to the Assets tab, I'm going to turn off the camera mode here really, really quickly. And if we go back to Assets here, you can see under Model and go Online, there are a couple of these sort of like backdrop planes. To the best of my knowledge, though, they are still flat planes, and none of them look very mountainous. And, hopefully they'll add some in. But ideally, you want something that's completely circular as well. You can get backdrop circle ones from the Sketchup warehouse. Just search for background. And architect Max Akowski. Now, I've talked about his stuff before and used it a lot. In fact, I encourage all my students to use it. They're just beautiful circular backgrounds with transparency built into the actual images. And so you can just load up a SketchUp scene. I had a SketchUp scene running concurrently with D5 and just hit the D5 export and send it over. And it will come in really looking like this. Just absolutely perfect. Now, this obviously is very green, and we're not really going for green landscape for our kind of alien environment, but, a little bit of haze on the environment and a little bit of depth of field and a lot of Photoshop, you won't even notice the green. Here is the obelisk. Again, this is the one that I had done earlier as a test run for this project. And you can see we've got all of our materials set up. We've got our base color map. This was the albedo. Sometimes called diffuse, but more strictly the albedo. The normal map, our zero specular. We've got our roughness, metallic, and ambient occlusion in there as well. And the emissive is set to really, really, really strong. And you can see the emissive map is working as intended. In order to give a more sort of ominous glow, I went ahead and added some strip lights. You can see I've got about 6 of them here. Technically, any type of lighting probably would have worked. because D5's lights are just brilliant and they don't go through objects. So anything but just a little strip light, and I just have them placed, rotated 90 degrees and just placed into the object. That's to imply that there's some sort of like energy, power, or something coming from in between the pillars or columns of the obelisk or monolith. And although I'm pretty happy with the look of this. Now, again, we did bring in a scale reference. So if I hit M on the keyboard and go to recent, actually, that was a different file. So let's just go to character. Also, sorry, that took a while. Let's just drop one of these characters in. Doesn't really matter here, businessman. Now, I'm just going to drop this guy in just so you can kind of see the scale that everything is set to. There we go. So a little bit larger than the original scene we had, but that's kind of what we're going for. This will be important when we pop into Photoshop and we use generative AI to produce two different things, one being a rover vehicle and one being sort of a spacesuit person. And so this gives you an idea of the internal logical scale that we're going for. Now, the other thing to do is obviously set up a camera. I have one set up right here. And you can see I added some more rocks from Megascans. These are actually, I'm sorry, not Megascans, these are D5 rocks, and they're absolutely superb. And they fitted into the landscape quite well. Again, just click on our scene here. Now, in terms of environment, I use just the HDRI sky. This doesn't matter because we're actually going to change the sky in Photoshop. But what does sort of matter, though, is the actual direction of the sun. And to make sure that we're kind of getting sun coming from either left or right angles, because one side of the image is going to be very kind of bright and the other is going to be slightly darker and a bit more dramatic and Rembrandt-esque. And so that's the only thing that matters, not the type of sky that you use, because we're going to change that. I've left almost everything else default. Did turn on a little dash of fog just so we can, again, haze out the background. And make sure the start distance is pretty far in the fog. We don't want it close to the camera. Put it all the way back. I did try precipitation for cool rain effect, and it didn't really work very well. One issue with this is really just, if you kind of look here, how it interacts with the ground plane. It's I couldn't get a good look for this to work, so I think if we wanted to do more of this, Photoshop might be the way to go. User mileage might vary on that one. Now, in terms of anything else to do with the environment, just HDRI, relatively low intensity, rotated the correct way, leave everything else kind of off. All right, in terms of effects, now this is again just sort of up to the view and the user and the vibe you're kind of going for. I haven't messed around with the highlight, local exposure, shadow exposure. I'm being very kind of basic on this one. A little dash of bloom, but honestly, you can turn this off. You could do this in Photoshop with a little bit of a paint over, which is what we'll kind of end up doing. And do adjust the actual exposure. You always want to turn off the auto exposure. Tends to be very bright in D5, so just take that down a little bit more. And you want to be the one to basically control the exposure of your image a little bit. So just make sure that you're in charge. Other than that, you can always turn on, I think I did the modern dystopian lookup table or looked, and just drop that intensity down. You just want to color tint things a little dash, but nothing too pronouncedly strong. A lot of the color is going to come from actually Photoshop. Bloom, sure, why not? Bloom is always cool, looks great. And then adjust the highlight, shadow, and slope, basically the brightest points, the darkest points, and the mid values of the image to get something that you like the overall look of. Once that was done, go to your camera settings. We're going to go to camera. I did export this at originally 8K, and that was, about to explode my computer. So I put it down to 6K. Do make sure all the channels are turned on, and I have mine set to JPEG. In terms of the focal length, 15 to 18 is fine, and you can adjust the aspect ratio. I think I did 16 to 9. And other than that, yeah, that's pretty good. Last thing you might want to do is just select your scale figure and delete them. You do not want a person in a business suit walking around your eldritch concept art. And other than that, I think that looks pretty good. With that being said, let's go ahead and render this and bounce over to Photoshop. In addition, if you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Really do appreciate it, and really do love seeing people comment on the videos, whether you like them or dislike them. But either way, it's great to get some feedback from everybody. Thank you so much. Cheers. All right, everybody. And we're back in Photoshop with our finished raw renders. You can see here, we take a quick look here. We've got our material ID, sometimes referred to as the clown pass, and that's going to allow us to make some selections. We've got our reflection layer, and we've got our AO or ambient occlusion layer, all the nice kind of nooks and crannies. Now, the only thing that's changed here is I did toggle on a kind of blue glow. We lost a little bit of this from D5 render, just the direction the line lights are facing. And so here we have it kind of just fixed in post. All right, I'm gonna bring our AO layer to the top of the stack, change the blend mode on this one. And we do wanna make sure that whatever we change it to, you're gonna try and go for the darker colors. You wanna avoid maybe having, basically an overlay, a layer that sort of basically overly changes the other layers, maybe just a little bit too much. So if we look at it and multiply, we're getting some of the nooks and crannies back in a little bit, and I'm going to drop that down quite a bit as well. I'm going to grab the reflection layer, bring that up as well, and change the blend mode on this to maybe, let's toggle between lighten and screen. I think it's probably going to be lighten. And again, we'll drop the opacity of that down. We don't want them to blow up the image too much. Okay, select all three of these layers, right-click, duplicate the layers, say OK. Right-click, merge these layers, and this is going to be our new background. So BKG, just change the name to background. And we'll right-click and we'll duplicate that one more time. Now, we're pretty much done with everything except maybe the sky mask and the material ID layer. So I'm going to bring these two to the top of our stack. Let's do Control D to deselect anything. And we'll just move these guys right up there. And then the older stuff, we can just put that into a group and just kind of keep the layers palette a little bit cleaner. All right, duplicate the background layer. All right, this is looking fine. And what we'll do is we'll add a quick levels adjustment to this. I'll move myself to the left. And just looking at the image as Photoshop interprets it on the histogram here, you can kind of see we've got a little bit maybe too much on the brighter values. So we can try hitting the auto button here just to try and readjust it, or we can just run through the presets really quickly and just see what looks good. Might go for something a little bit more like that where the contrast is increased. And I'm actually going to then merge this fella down. So just right click and merge down. Now you'll notice the sky is getting kind of blown out a little bit too much. So what we need to do is change our actual sky. Okay, everybody, in order to add our sky, what we're going to do is go up to Edit, Sky Replacement. And overall, the only issue with this really is that it does kind of come down over really the obelisk, and you're not really seeing it over the mountains. So you can click accept to all of this, then it'll be fine. And what I ended up actually doing was going up to the sky replacement group and manually grabbing this layer, just kind of moving it physically down so it covers the mountains, and then adding a mask, and you can see the effects of the mask right there. All right, all in all, blending pretty nicely. Pretty kind of a nice little fog effect as well, a little bit. I think we're in a pretty good spot. Let's select all these layers, merge them. Well, actually, let's duplicate them first, and then we will merge them. And if we need to keep or make any more changes, we have all of this stuff back here. So again, just pop that into a wee little group. And then we've got, this will be our, effectively the new layer is going to sit right here. Okay, so that should look pretty nice. Old sky, new sky, and they're blending quite nicely. All right, we'll duplicate this little fellow one more time. Move my layers over to the side. And what we'll actually do is go down to our levels first. And I will grab this and just move it over here. And we're going to hit update the histogram. And we can ask Photoshop to figure out the levels, or we can just manually run through. Now, I'm going for something with a little bit more contrast, but I'm mindful I don't want to necessarily lose a huge amount of detail on the obelisk itself. So something along the lines of that looks pretty good. If I've lost my panel, my actual layers, let's go window, layers, there it is. And you can see again, we do have that nice little mask. So if we find our, well, material ID, hit W, select the obelisk again, and just brush black on the mask. And that should keep the fidelity back the way it was without being adjusted by the levels. Now, one really cool thing about this is if I hit W again here and I select the obelisk, I'm going to go select, save selection, and I usually just use numbers 1, 2, 3. Okay, that'll be very handy going forward if we need to actually make some more changes. So back to the levels, Control D to deselect everything, and we can now go ahead and add our curves layer. And we're going for, you can see here, the curves will kind of tell you like the darks, midtones, and highlights. And so our midtones are looking a bit washed out. Let's flick to these really quickly. And I'm looking for an S curve. So increased contrast is probably the one we're going to end up using. So medium contrast, I think increased contrast will work fine. Toggle that off. Next step we want to do is make some large color changes to the image. And here is our image. I'm going to minimize everything right now. And just going to make a duplicate of this layer again. We're going to go up to Image, Adjustments, and Match Color. And then I'm going to load up this sky, which I think came from Unsplash. And we can tweak some of the settings here. It won't have a massive effect on the overall look of the image, but I do want the luminance, the brightness, if you will, to be a little bit higher. And I think that's looking pretty nice. Quite pronounced. You can kind of see the difference there. And we can just drop the opacity of this slightly. I want some of the look, not all of it. Duplicate those layers again, merge layers, and I'm going to duplicate it one more time. And now we're going to make some pretty seismic kind of changes to this. So what we're going to do is go up to the burn and dodge tool. And so the burn tool is effectively going to allow us to lighten really sort of like chunks of the image. So the dodge tool will lighten and the burn tool will darken the image. And so I'm going to turn off caps lock because that's making my camera go a little bit crazy. All right. And what we're going to do first is darken the midtones. And I'm just going to left click and drag my mouse over the image. And that'll work. This is at a pretty low exposure. Let's bring this up to about 40%, maybe 40, 50. I'm going to make my brush quite large here. And I'm just slowly kind of introducing a little more dramatic look to this, especially on the skies. Okay. I'm going to adjust the highlights too. Just kind of darken these. And I'm working my way over the image. Now, I'm also going to toggle here as well between the dodge tool. And the dodge tool right now, I'm going to set it to the midtones. And I'm going to lighten up some of these areas over here. I'll lighten up around the obelisk. Nice. And then we're going to lighten up some of the shadows on the sky too as well. Just kind of dabbing the brush around, slowly adjusting, going from midtones to highlights. And let's darken the shadows here again. Just running that brush softly over the image, going for a more visually dramatic appeal. All right, going to add a paint layer here. Going to then just grab my soft paintbrush. It's a regular old soft, fluffy paintbrush. Sketch around. And I'm going to add a little bit of blue into this image. Just, again, sort of just make this quite large now. There we go. Over here on the other side, I'm going to add in some yellow. And go for slightly warmer. About there will look good. I'm on the same layer, just on the top here. And I'm going to change the blend mode on both of these. Now lighten, probably go for something akin to, I think, screen here. And again, I don't want it necessarily on the obelisk, so I'm going to go select, load selection, use the drop down 1, 2, 3, and we will add a little mask to this. Go. And just paint that out again. Now, I find the screen is, it's really nice for just getting that kind of look that we're going for. And drop the opacity of this ever so slightly. We're just slightly tinting that sky up on the top right. All right, just slightly. I'm going to add another new layer here, grab another paintbrush, and then I'm going to darken the sky just a little bit over here on the left. And again, change that blend mode to, we can kind of experiment here just a little bit, just running through these blend modes and just seeing what looks good. Linear burn, and just slowly take that back just a dash. Okay. Add a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. Okay, kind of liking the look of this. I'm going to bring that guy back down again and duplicate it one more time, and we can experiment with some more burning and dodging. So I'm going to do the burn tool again. I'm going to darken these shadows, and I really want to darken this area back here as well. And you can see just by doing this, slowly working your way around the image, you're just kind of adding kind of visual sort of appeal, a little bit of contrast, giving it a slight painterly feel. All right, we're going to add a new layer, add a little bit more dust and sort of fog to this. To do this, I'm going to go to my brushes, and I'm going to scroll all the way down here. And this is a collection of brushes that came from Archie9. I'll try and link out to them. They're really great post-production brushes. And so I'm going to grab this, maybe this little cloud brush here. Just see how large my icon is there. Not too bad. Hit X on the keyboard. And I'm on a new layer. Caps lock to turn off the key. And I'm just going to start making sure I can run this brush across here. And I'm sorry, I need to grab the, helps if I grab the actual paintbrush. All right, and yeah, let's do clouds too. There we go. Let's see what it's going to look like. I'm just going to start adding in this very kind of little bit subtle fog mist. Now, I like the fog that came with D5, but I think a little bit more will kind of help. Grab the eraser and just slowly kind of mark off the areas we don't want. Yeah, pretty happy with just overall, just these little kind of puffs of cloud that give your thing a little bit more of an atmospheric look. And again, we can always change the blend mode here, just cycle through these and see what looks good. Linear dodge, add normal, those will all work just fine. All right, put it back to normal and drop that down a bit. And I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to merge this guy down. Okay, next thing we want to do is let's go and add some generative fill content from Photoshop. Now, in order to set the scale for our kind of obelisk shot, I'm going to zoom in quite a bit, and we want to give it a sci-fi feel. And let's just see, yeah, let's put our vehicle about here. And let's make sure this is nice. You want to start maybe on the bottom, because that's where the wheels of the vehicle are going to go. And okay, let's get generative fill. So let's do something like this. All right, so running our Photoshop generative fill, you can see the objects that we have right here. So I'm going to hide this bar again, and I'm going to zoom in. So we've got kind of this armored rover style vehicle. Wheels don't look wonderful when you zoom in, but whatever. Let's go ahead and add a quick layer here, and I'm going to add just some lights. I'm going to bring my brush tool really far down, make sure it's set to just the soft round. And again, sorry about the flickering. Thanks, Photoshop. And we're going to bring this guy down, and I need to add some color lights to this. So let's do very vivid red. Make them look really good. And I'm going to find some spots here that are already kind of lit up. There we go. And then if we want to add maybe a different type of maybe sort of undercarriage lighting or something like that, bring back in the blue. And what I'll do on that one is I think just bring it down, and we'll do back here, just do two little subtle dots. All right, zoom back out, and you can see the effect. Overall, yeah, looks pretty fun. Change the blend mode to lighten your screen if you want, and we'll see what that works. That's fine. All right, overall, it is starting to take shape. Next thing will be to add in an actual person, a character for scale. You can see we've got our scale figure right here. Now, the scale figure is important because people are generally drawn towards looking at people, and so it's important to help set the scale of the monolith. Now, one thing I don't really love, and this is just kind of the nature of it, is that we have lost a lot of fidelity on the actual monolith. Towards the end, we may end up photoshopping the original one back in here and just kind of bringing back some of that detail. all in all, pretty happy. I've lost some cloud detail though, so what I'm going to do is just duplicate this layer, which should be a copy of everything. I'm going to go to, let's see, just a black and white adjustment layer. And I'm just going to run through some of these now. I'm looking at this area on the left, and I'm just trying to get as much kind of detail as I can back. That looks good. That's probably about as good as we can actually get it. And then what we can do is change the blend mode of this. Now I'm only looking at the clouds on the top left. I just want to get some detail back in there if I can. And so I think, yeah, linear burn, color burn. So again, just running through these little guys, just seeing what looks good. Let's try multiply. Okay, yeah, multiply will give us a nice little bit of a pop. And then again, I'm on a mask here. Sorry about that noise. And what I'm going to do is just paint everything else out except what I actually want. Overall, I think things are looking pretty good. Last few finishing touches, going back to the Arc9 brush set, which again, I'll try and link out to. Please remind me if I don't. And I'm going to look for some birds. I'm going to put these on a new layer. Go. And what I'm going to do is just toggle them into black. And I think just something like, let's put it on this new layer up at the top. And I'm going to make sure, again, I'm on my paintbrush now, not on the burn dodge tools, which is a mistake I seem to keep making today. Birds. And there we go. Now, I actually want these to be full opacity, so let's try that again. And then the next thing we can do is actually just flip the brush different direction. And then I'm actually going to make these smaller and just put some of these off in the distance, just like that. In other words, there's something alive kind of on the planet. It's not completely empty. And I think that looks pretty good. Let's commit. I'm going to just merge everything at this point. Merge all down. Duplicate layers. I'm going to go to camera raw. Filter. And camera raw. And this is really the last bit, is just completely changing the look and feel of the image. And with these presets, I'm just going to run through and look for something different. You can see these can massively change the look and feel of the work, but really it's just about finding one that you like the look of. I'm going to run down to this Oaks 1, and then I'm going to hit back and go to the actual settings here. You can see it is quite pronounced. It's kind of blowing a lot of the color changes that we've made a little bit, but I like it all the same. And I want to just manually tweak this here. Now, it's overly strong for our purposes, so what we'll do is then just use that slider to bring it back down. But all in all, pretty happy with the look and feel of this image. Now that we're actually done, we can go image size, and I'm going to drop this down substantially before we save. Now, one other thing you could do is also add a lot more depth of field. You can use the blur brush to go in there and paint content in and out. But I think for our purposes, I'm overall just pretty happy with the overall image. So between this and the test images, pretty good.